Can a state like Illinois ban commonly owned semi-automatic firearms? That's a question that's going to be tackled in the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court starting today with a bench trial. Back at it with Illinois in Focus Daily, I'm Greg Bishop with America's Talking Network and the Center Square. So let's get right on into it because it's going to be a big day with a lot of testimony. I expect it to last all throughout the morning into the afternoon with plaintiffs and the defense laying out their case as to whether or not governments can ban semi-automatic firearms. This case has gone all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and back down to the district court, and now here we are facing a bench trial for final judgment. But I want to give some background as to how we've gotten to this point so people can clearly understand what's at stake. So January of 2023, Governor J.B. Pritzker signed the Protect Illinois Communities Act, and that's a measure that bans more than 170 semi-automatic rifles, shotguns, and handguns. It bans the sale of magazines over 15 rounds for handguns and over 10 rounds for rifles. It also requires a registration of those who had already had such banned firearms to register with Illinois State Police. All of this, of course, going into effect immediately in January of 2023. Shortly thereafter, a bevy of lawsuits were filed in both state courts and federal courts. We're looking now today at the bench trial for the Southern District cases that were consolidated. We'll talk a little bit about some of the state cases and where those ultimately ended up, even going to the Illinois Supreme Court. But to get to the crux of the case here, the question at hand really seems to focus on whether or not states and governments can ban commonly owned firearms, with plaintiffs saying the Second Amendment protects their rights to keep and bear arms, while the defense, the state of Illinois, says that these firearms are dangerous and military adjacent and should be banned. All of this, of course, coming after the Highland Park Independence Day Parade shooting in 2022. That was really a predicate of sorts that had Democrats in the state legislature pushing for what they called an assault weapons ban. So we're looking right now, heading into the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court. I'm actually getting ready to head into the courtroom in East St. Louis, where I will be posting live updates at x.com/bishoponair, and a full story will be posted this afternoon at thecentersquare.com. But before we tackle some of the latest in the case against Illinois' gun and magazine ban in federal court, let's just review briefly the state level cases. A lot of interest there, as there was a ton of action last year. You had, for instance, Attorney Thomas DeVore representing thousands of plaintiffs, from individuals to gun stores in state level cases. He had secured temporary restraining orders against the state from enforcing the Protect Illinois Communities Act against his clients. And that lasted for months in some cases. We're talking thousands of people. But then you also had State Representative Dan Calkins bring a similar case challenging the state's gun ban in state court. That got a temporary restraining order issued. Actually, the district court had final judgment on that case, correcting myself here, and that final judgment allowed it to go to the state Supreme Court. And all of that court drama happening in 2023, to where in August of 2023, the Illinois Supreme Court, ultimately after hearing Calkins's case, ruled in favor of the state of Illinois. So that put to rest a lot of the state level cases. But what we're looking at here in East St. Louis for the case challenging Illinois' gun and magazine ban in federal court looks at 4 cases in the Southern District consolidated where they're challenging the state's gun ban on Second Amendment grounds. And the arguments that I've seen thus far in court filings hinges upon whether or not commonly owned firearms can be banned. So moving forward here, we're going to hear a lot of witness testimony from both sides. And one little note that I do want to add is one of the plaintiffs' groups in the Barnett v. Raoul case, the Langley plaintiffs, they had actually challenged the law not just on Second Amendment grounds, they challenged the law on Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment grounds. On the Fifth Amendment grounds, that would deal with challenging the state's gun registry, because a component of the Protect Illinois Communities Act required individuals to register their firearms if they owned such banned firearms before the law went into effect. And we could talk a lot detail about the amount of people that didn't register those firearms by the deadline of December 31st, 2023. By all accounts, the compliance rate is very low. But regardless, the Langley plaintiffs' Fifth Amendment challenge and the 14th Amendment challenge, they were dismissed earlier this month before heading into this bench trial with Judge Stephen McGlynn. But even rewinding a bit further, because of course we talked a little bit about the state level cases that went through the process all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court, and ultimately the Illinois Supreme Court siding with the state of Illinois. For the federal cases that were filed and consolidated back in April of 2023, Judge Stephen McGlynn issued a preliminary injunction in favor of the plaintiffs, and that brought about what the Second Amendment community called Freedom Week, and that ultimately allowed for individuals to go out and purchase semi-automatic firearms and magazines and to take them without having to register them. But that preliminary injunction only lasted 6 days before the state took that preliminary injunction to the 7th District Court of Appeals and got the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals to issue a stay, essentially putting a halt to McGlynn's preliminary injunction. So a preliminary injunction is an initial action. It's an initial step that is taken in a case. So the plaintiff said, we want the law put on hold while we deal with the crux of the question that we're challenging here. So ultimately, Judge Stephen McGlynn in the Southern District handling these cases said, yes, we'll give you a hold of the law, but the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals 6 days later reversed that. And then months later, after hearing the case in the appeals court on the preliminary injunction, the appeals court sided with the state, saying they had a likelihood of succeeding on the merits. So then fast forward to earlier this year, plaintiffs took that appeals court ruling on the preliminary injunction and attempted to get the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case. But the case wasn't complete. There was no final judgment from the district court. And Justice Clarence Thomas, he said that ultimately they want a case that is complete. They want a full record to be able to tackle this particular issue of whether or not states can ban commonly owned firearms. And they did not have that full record dealing with the preliminary issues. So now we get to the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court and the case on the merits, final judgment. And that's where you've got Judge Stephen McGlynn set to hear in the Southern District. Just moments, we'll be heading into the courtroom, and you can follow me at x.com/bishoponair for those live updates. And you can also find the full story at thecentersquared.com. But we anticipate to hear a lot of experts' testimony from both sides, with the state of Illinois working to defend their gun and magazine ban. And some of the arguments that we've already seen, the state is working to characterize firearms like AR-15s or AK-47s as military-style weapons, even though they're semi-automatic and not fully automatic. They may work in some anecdotes about, violent crime. There may even be some conversations about attempted assassinations of political leaders. So we'll be watching closely what some of those arguments are. But the plaintiffs have been quick to point out that these firearms are commonly owned, and they are firearms that have proliferated with ownership levels at a certain rate, and it's a little burdensome to infringe upon that right to keep and bear arms. So that Second Amendment argument definitely is going to be a focus. Again, with the Langley plaintiffs as part of this plaintiffs group, their Fifth Amendment and 14th Amendment arguments against the gun and magazine ban, those were dismissed earlier this month. So the focus purely on that Second Amendment question of whether or not governments can ban commonly owned firearms. So that's the question here in front of Judge Stephen McGlynn as we prepare to head in to give you those updates and report out the latest. Will this bench trial lead to a final judgment against the gun and magazine ban, and when will that happen? It's entirely possible that judges, they can rule from the bench. I don't anticipate that. I see that there could be a moment where the judge says he's going to take all this under advisement, meaning he's going to take all the arguments he's heard and then write an order and release an order, and that could take several weeks. So will that happen today? Not likely. Will it be a couple of weeks before we get an order? That's possible. Will today be the only day that the bench trial is held? That as well is uncertain. We'll see how the day progresses and whether or not they need to come back for more of the bench trial. But this is on final judgment. This is not on preliminary grounds. All that we saw go through the courts in 2023, those were all on preliminary issues, not on the merits, not looking for final judgment. Today, that bench trial focusing on final judgment begins in the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court, where we're getting ready to head in. And again, follow me on x.com/bishoponair. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Afterwards, we'll be talking with several of the plaintiffs' groups and getting their thoughts on how the hearing went. So be looking for those updates with Illinois in Focus Daily. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, give the podcast with America's Talking Network and Illinois in Focus anywhere you get your podcasts. And we'll see you back here with Illinois in Focus Daily with the latest.